Okay, so what if I told you that one of the biggest challenges to the Christian faith could actually be one of its greatest tools? It sounds kind of crazy, right? But that's exactly what we're going to talk about today with David Hume. This guy was a philosophical giant, and believe me, his ideas are still sending shockwaves through the foundations of faith. But here's the thing, we're not going to treat Hume like some enemy we need to defeat. No, think of him more like an intellectual sparring partner. He's a challenger whose really tough questions can actually force us to sharpen our arguments, strengthen our own beliefs, and in the end, go even deeper.
All right, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we're going to meet the man himself. Then we'll get into his skeptical toolkit, the very weapons he used to attack two huge pillars of our faith, miracles and the idea of a divine designer. But don't worry, we're not stopping there. We'll look at the strong Christian response to his arguments. And finally, we'll bring it all home and talk about why this guy from 18th century Scotland is so incredibly relevant for your ministry right here, right now, in 21st century Nigeria. So, you ready to step into the ring? Let's do it.
So, first things first. Before we can really dig into Hume's arguments, we've got to understand the man behind them. I mean, who was this guy? What was it that drove him to question, well, pretty much everything? His life, it turns out, is a fascinating window into his really mind-bending ideas.
So this is Hume in his own words. He paints a picture of himself as this, it's mild, cheerful, social guy, the kind of person you'd love to have at a dinner party. But that was just the surface. Underneath that cheerful exterior was a mind that was totally at war with the established order. I mean, his ideas were so radical for the time that he was accused of being an atheist, and that was a very dangerous accusation to have in 18th century Scotland. So this public image he had, it was a whole world away from the intellectual firestorm his writing was about to cause. And this timeline, wow, it really tells the story, doesn't it? His masterpiece, the treatise, he said it fell dead-born from the press. Imagine that, your life's work, and it's a total failure. That had to be a crushing blow. But it also just fueled his fire. Then he gets denied a professorship not once but twice. Why? Because his views were considered too dangerous for young minds. So when you look at all this rejection, is it really any surprise that this is a man who would start to question the very foundations of knowledge and belief? It makes sense. And it also explains why he made sure his most direct attacks on religion were only published after he was long gone.
Okay, so how did he do it? How did this guy, this controversial figure, create the philosophical tools he needed to challenge centuries of Western thought? Well, that's what we're doing next. Let's open up his skeptical toolkit and take a look at the powerful instruments he was working with.
All right, the first tool in his kit, and this is the big one, is his radical empiricism. It all comes down to this. For Hume, all knowledge comes from your senses, period. Think about it like this. When you're born, your mind is a blank slate. Everything you come to know gets written on that slate through your experiences, what you see, hear, taste, touch, and smell. So you know what a mango is because you've seen one, you've felt it, you've tasted it. But here's the kicker. If you have an idea that you can't trace back to a direct sense experience, well, for Hume, that's not knowledge. It's just make-believe.
Now, if you follow that logic, it leads to an absolute bombshell. Let's talk about cause and effect. Imagine I drop this book. You see the book fall, and you see it hit the table. But did you actually see the cause? Did you see the force of gravity pulling it down? Hume's answer is a hard no. All you actually saw was one event, the book falling, followed by another event, the book hitting the table. That's it. Because you've seen it happen over and over, your mind creates a mental habit, an expectation. This was revolutionary. For centuries, everyone just assumed causation was a real force out there in the world. Hume comes along and says, nope, it's just a habit in your mind. And he doesn't stop there. He takes this exact same logic and applies it to something deeply personal, the idea of you. He says, okay, just like we can't actually perceive causation, try to perceive yourself. When he tried to look inward, he didn't find some continuous soul or core identity. All he found was a constant stream of different perceptions, a feeling of warmth, the color blue, a flash of anger, a moment of joy. So for Hume, the self isn't a thing. It's just a bundle of perceptions, always changing. And you can immediately see where this is going, can't you? If there's no permanent I, no stable self, then what does that mean for the concept of an immortal soul? So now Hume has his toolkit ready. He's questioned causation, he's questioned the self, and now he's ready to take on his biggest target. He aims his skeptical weapons right at the heart of revealed religion itself, the very idea of miracles. Here is his core principle, and it's deceptively simple. He says to think of it like a balance scale. On one side, you put all of human experience, everything we know about the laws of nature. People don't walk on water, dead people don't come back to life, that's a massive weight on that side of the scale. On the other, much lighter side, you put the testimony of a few people who claim they saw a miracle. For Hume, it's no contest. The scale is always going to tip towards the laws of nature. He argues that it is always more likely that the person telling the story is either lying or mistaken than it is that the fundamental laws of the universe were broken. And the implications of that, especially for the resurrection, well, they're just devastating.
And he doesn't just leave it there. He builds his case with a four-pronged attack on testimony itself. First, he says, the witnesses are never good enough. They lack character or education. Second, he points out that we humans just love a good sensational story, and we tend to exaggerate. Third, and this one is very problematic, he claims these stories always come from, in his words, ignorant and barbarous nations. And fourth, he says that all the different religions have their own miracle stories, and they basically cancel each other out. Now, as we're going through this list, I want you to start thinking like a critic. Do you see any potential holes in these arguments? For example, is it really fair to just dismiss someone's testimony because they lived in a different time or place? Just keep that in the back of your mind.
This next part, this thought experiment he comes up with, it's really astonishing. It shows you just how deep his skepticism goes. He says, look, imagine the absolute best-case scenario for a miracle. Let's say every historian on the planet, all of them, agreed that Queen Elizabeth I had risen from the dead. All the documents, all the records, all in perfect agreement. Even then, Hume says he would still choose to believe that the entire world was involved in some massive lie, some incredible knavery and folly, rather than believe that a law of nature was violated. This shows you it's not really about evidence for him. This is a deep philosophical commitment against the very possibility of a miracle ever happening.
Okay, so he's pretty much dismissed revealed religion, the kind based on miracles and testimony. But he's not done. Next, he turns his skeptical gaze toward natural religion. Specifically, he's going after the most popular argument for God's existence at the time, the argument from design. You know the one, the idea that you look at the complex, orderly universe and you conclude it must have had an intelligent designer.
And he does this in a really clever way, through his book, The Dialogues. He basically stages a debate between three characters. First, you've got Demia, who represents the kind of rigid, old-school orthodoxy. Then there's Cleanthes, the smart philosopher who makes the classic argument from design, the world is like a machine, so it must have a machine maker. And then there's Philo. Philo is the sly, careless skeptic. And let's be clear, Philo is Hume. He's Hume's mouthpiece, and his job in the dialogue is to just systematically and brilliantly take apart everyone else's arguments.
And the sharpest weapon in Philo's arsenal is the age-old problem of evil. He basically asks this: is God willing to prevent evil but not able? Then he's not all-powerful. Is he able but not willing? Then he must be evil himself. If he is both able and willing, then where does all this suffering come from? This isn't just a philosophical game. For anyone in ministry, you know this is a raw, painful, deeply personal question. Philo looks at all the disease, the natural disasters, the cruelty in the world, and he asks, how can you possibly look at this evidence and conclude that the designer is perfectly good and all-powerful?
Now, Hume's arguments are powerful. They're compelling. But they were not the last word on the matter, not by a long shot. In fact, they basically sparked a huge debate that is still going on today. So the question is, how did Christian thinkers push back? How did they answer this incredible onslaught of skepticism?
Well, let's go back to that attack on the witnesses of miracles. Thinkers like George Campbell came along and pointed out a massive flaw in Hume's reasoning. Hume demanded that witnesses be of unquestioned good sense, education, and learning. But Campbell said, hang on a second. If we actually use that standard for all of history, we'd have to throw out almost everything we know about the ancient world. Most people weren't wealthy or formally educated. Hume's standard wasn't just unfair. If you actually applied it consistently, it would make the entire job of being a historian completely impossible.
So the bottom line is this. Critics basically accuse Hume of cheating. He was playing with a loaded deck. And here's the key takeaway for us. Hume's argument against miracles isn't some neutral, objective look at the evidence. Not at all. It's totally shaped by his own starting assumptions. He starts with the presupposition that miracles can't happen, and then, surprise, surprise, his argument proves that they can't happen. It's a perfect example of circular reasoning. But what if you start from a different place? What if you start with the possibility that the God who created the laws of nature in the first place might, just might, be able to intervene in his own creation? If you start there, the whole conversation about probability changes completely.
Okay, so we've been talking about an 18th century Scottish philosopher. What does any of this have to do with us, right now? Well, everything, because the ghost of David Hume is alive and well in the 21st century.
And especially here in Nigeria, where faith is such a vibrant, central part of our culture, it's more important than ever that we learn how to engage with the kind of deep skepticism he championed.
I mean, just listen to how he ends one of his most famous books. He says, if you pick up any book about theology or metaphysics, you should ask one question. Does it contain abstract reasoning about quantity or number? No. Does it contain experimental reasoning about matters of fact? No. And if the answer to both is no, he says, commit it then to the flames, for it can contain nothing but sophistry and illusion. That is not a friendly invitation to debate. That is a call to burn the books. He's saying that what we do, the study of God, is not just a waste of time, it's actively harmful. And that attitude, that challenge, is everywhere we look today.
You see, Hume's arguments are the bedrock of so much modern skepticism. Anytime you hear someone say extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, that's Hume speaking. Anytime a friend questions how a good God could allow so much suffering in the world, they're basically quoting his character Philo. Hume teaches us a crucial lesson. Evidence is never neutral. It's always interpreted through a person's worldview, their web of beliefs. That's why two people can look at the very same historical data for the resurrection, and one sees the glory of God while the other just sees a silly myth. So for you, as future pastors, as ministry leaders, understanding Hume is absolutely critical. It's not enough to just know what you believe. He forces us to know why we believe it and to build a faith that is intellectually tough and ready for the hard questions.
And so that really is the challenge that Hume leaves us with. It's a question I want to leave with you today. In a world that is so deeply shaped by his brand of skepticism, how are we going to articulate a Christian faith that is not only rooted in the reality of a God who acts in history, but is also intellectually credible? This isn't a call to abandon faith, it's a call to understand it, to defend it, and to articulate it with more wisdom and more clarity than ever before. Hume throws down the gauntlet, and it's our job to pick it up. That's the real work of ministry.